a very complex plot, but well, have you seen the film Logan's Run?
Oh, yes, yeah.
Because the atmosphere in X Factor reminded me of that as well. It was like these people were desperate to basically not be killed. That's what it felt like. It wasn't that they felt they were sharing their creativity or sharing their gift. It was like this was their one chance to not be humiliated, and yet there they were up there. And isn't humiliation a huge part of the X Factor process?
Well, that comes from a very deep-rooted motif within West, and actually all world tradition. And I go over this in the new book. It's the idea of regicide in many sort of pre-Babylonian and many even, right up to fairly recent times in Africa and parts of Asia. And it existed in Europe, and particularly in the Gaelic countries. It was actually at one time, Ireland up until about the 5th and 6th century, this was commonly practiced among the kingdoms, where you would have a mock king, somebody who was a nobody, a peasant or a serf, who would be brought up from the ranks or selected and allowed to be the king for a week. He would have access to the king's concubines. So in some cases, in the African tribes, he could even have sex with the queen. And he would wear the king's robes, enjoy his food, and live in absolute luxury. And then at some point, usually after a week or 5 days, or sometimes it was done according to lunar cycles, he'd be ritually murdered. He'd be murdered in front of the population. And I see that same idea on these shows, not only the X Factor shows, but shows like Big Brother. You're brought in there, given a limited amount of star, and then it's taken away from you, and often in the most humiliating ways, where you see yourself on the cover of these awful magazines like Closer, which is interesting in itself, because if you look at that magazine Closer, it's in the newsstands. It's about fallen celebrities, and very often they're people that have their 5 minutes of fame from these kinds of shows. And what they'll often do is, because it says CLOSE, or part of the celebrity or something they'll be holding up, will cover up much of the C, so the actual magazine title says loser. And this is very clever. This is a very clever trick that's played, a very clever sleight of hand. And also, the rest of us who never get this fame, our insecurities, our failings, and all the things we didn't do in our lives, we're jealous of this person who at least got a small period of stardom. So we enjoy tearing them down. We enjoy hating them. So they play on very sort of powerful psychoanalytical ideas of human beings being filled with engineered envies and jealousies. And the idea of the mock king, regicide, lives very much on to this day within X Factor and Big Brother and those shows.
As well as this humiliation about reality TV, you mentioned Big Brother, and of course we talked about X Factor, and there's one episode very well known. Listeners outside of the UK may not be familiar with this, but they can certainly go and look it up. And it was the tragic life and very public death of a reality TV quote-unquote star called Jade Goody.
Well, the Jade Goody thing is a remarkable story. That's why I covered it in the book. It says it all, really. If you really want an insight, in 1,000 years from now, if they want an insight into British culture and Irish culture too, because we had that here too, just look at the Jade Goody story. It has it all. The nobody who was brought up to be the king, or the queen in her case, she has the people love her, and they do. She's one ordinary girl who gets brought up, so we have the ritual regicide thing developing. Then she has her little period where TV shows and everything like that. She goes back on a celebrity Big Brother. Now she's a queen. She's no longer one of us. So they're waiting for her, or they're planning, I believe, to take her down. So they have these two other Muppets in these two other like dysfunctional females in there with them, and they start this racial bullying, which, to be fair, if you look at that video now, she wasn't the worst. They actually put her mother in there and everything to try and wire her up. This Indian actress called Shilpa Shetty. And it was pretty horrible to watch at the time, but it wasn't the end of the world the way the media made it out. Now, she was probably, of the 4 people involved in that incident, the least culpable. But what did they do? They made the media targeted her and made an example of her. Suddenly she was public enemy number 1. And the people who had loved her last year were now, devoted to hating her this year. Visceral hatred. I mean, this woman was like really under some tremendous, intense public hatred. And I mean, I've nothing against her. She was an uneducated woman. She was not a very smart person, and she was in many ways a victim. So she's put up there. Then she has like this thing where she tries to go to India and she tries to apologize and so on. And then the next thing you know, she gets sick. And then she's used as some kind of advertising thing for the the cervical cancer vaccine. Then she's suddenly okay again. The next thing you know, she drops dead, and she's the same people who had hated her love her again. She's almost transformed into kind of an icon. And it's the strangest thing. And the media, to see actual British journalists, newspaper journalists, outside her house where the flowers were, in almost fake convulsions of grief. The whole thing has to be planned. In fact, there's a part of me actually believes that many of these journalists are particularly the newspaper journalists, a lot of them are psychologically unhinged. I'm absolutely convinced of that at this point, especially these ones who report on these celebrities. Something happens to them where they actually become to believe the own hype, and they will actually develop a sort of an affection for the hype on the story that they have. But Jade Goody was a remarkable story, and it's like I don't think people fully understand the significance of it from a socio-cultural point of view, because that really, if you wanted to have one thing and you can point to British culture in the 20th, 21st century in terms of what it is, point to the Jade Goody saga, because it says it all. There's nothing missing from that story.